My name's Karen Gosling. I'm the Director of Health and Rehabilitation at Dominican Hospital. I am the chair of the Symposium Advisory Board, and I am delighted to be here today. It is now my great pleasure to actually kick this off and introduce Nicholas. Nicholas Calciano is one of our board committee members. He's also the brother of John Nadherny. Nicholas received his undergraduate in finance as well as his master's of business administration in finance from St. Mary's College of California. Currently, he works in finance at Lucid Motors. Nick finds his service on the Symposium Advisory Board to be therapeutic in dealing with the loss of his brother, while helping to ensure sustainable financial strategies are implemented to perpetuate this memorial to John. So please join me in welcoming Nicholas.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Talk louder? All right. Good morning. My name is Nicholas Calciano, and on behalf of the Nadherny Calciano family, I wish to sincerely thank you for coming to the 26th Annual Symposium. Since the beginning of the symposium, we have explored diverse youth-centered topics, such as depression, bullying, learning challenges, substance abuse, and gender identity. Although our topics have varied greatly, the mission has remained constant: to foster open dialogue among physicians, social workers, healthcare, law enforcement, school personnel, to improve the access and quality of care to the youth in our community. So today I encourage you to talk with the person next to you, or even across the room, to start dialogue and continue to build relationships within our community. Today's topic, cultivating understanding and belonging, positively impacting youth mental health, will further enable you to help prevent tragedies to families within our beautiful community. For those of you that are new to this symposium, I want to say welcome. I want to give you a little bit of history behind my brother. John was my older brother who passed away when I was only 2 and he was 23. If I could have one conversation with him, I would let him know the immense impact this symposium has had on our community. Although this symposium bears his name, I believe this title represents all the families struggling, not only with the suicide of a loved one, but with behavioral challenges, substance abuse, violence, learning challenges, and other critical issues that affect our youth today. Our family is incredibly grateful, honored, and humbled to have the symposium's growth over the years and to a widely attended event that it is today. As difficult as our loss was and continues to be, the sense of community coming together to help prevent similar tragedies from affecting other families is a powerful healing force. On behalf of the family, our deepest appreciation goes to all those who have devoted their expertise, leadership, and time into putting this annual event. We are grateful to all the members of the Symposium's Advisory Committee, to the Dominican Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the symposium, and to the donors supporting the John E. Nadherny Endowment Fund, which underwrites the cost of this event. Lastly, to all of you attendees, it is only through your continued professionalism and commitment to our communities that enables the symposium material to impact the local youth. We simply just cannot do this event year after year without your support. Thank you for being part of today's symposium. I trust you will find the information presented to be beneficial in your work and hope you will continue to join us year after year. Thank you.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Meena Srivinasan. Meena Srivinasan is a contemplative leader, celebrated speaker, accomplished author, and visionary edupreneur. She is an educator, activist at heart, consistently championing the fusion of mindfulness, social and emotional learning, and belonging. In 2022, she was featured as one of Mindfulness Magazine's 10 Powerful Women of the Mindfulness Movement, while also gaining recognition in Educational Leadership magazine for her insights into mindful leadership and well-being. Her recent TED Talk, Unlocking the Secret Powers of Tenderness, is the 4th most viewed TED Talk in the world. released in 2024 with already more than 250,000 views. As a prominent voice in the field, she is the creative force behind the social and emotional learning everyday online courses, and author of Teach, Breathe, Learn, Mindfulness in and Out of the Classroom, SEL Every Day, Integrating SEL with Instruction in Secondary Classrooms, which was chosen as one of the 2019 favorite books for educators by the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and Integrating SEL into Everyday Classroom Quick Reference Guide. Meena is an instructor of graduate-level social and emotional learning courses at UC Berkeley and the founding executive director of Transformative Educational Leadership, or TEL. TEL is an immersive year-long fellowship for educational leaders committed to the power of inner transformation, collective impact, and becoming seeds of radical change in their communities. Meena is also the CEO of Karuna Consulting, LLC, an organization that takes its name from the Sanskrit word karuna, signifying compassion. Karuna Consulting is a nationally certified minority business enterprise driven by a profound mission: to foster a more compassionate world through Meena's keynotes, professional learning, coaching, and consulting services.
I'm going to invite us to just pause for a moment and take a breath and just see if we can touch in and savor this moment. For the past several years, we haven't been able to gather in spaces together, and it's wonderful that we have an opportunity to do that today. And I really want to start from a place of gratitude, and I want to express my heartfelt appreciation to the Calciano family. When I got the invitation to keynote this symposium almost a year ago, and I learned the story behind this symposium, my heart leapt. And it leapt because I was so inspired by one family's courage and bravery to transform tragedy and pain into purpose and loving action. And so I want to just lift up that all of us coming here today, we are part of something greater. We are part of doing different, and we are part of this story of collective resilience. And so just really want to honor the Calciano family, the board. It's been such a joy to be able to connect with the board members who've been working tirelessly to create the conditions for today to really manifest. And I want to express my gratitude to all of you. So those of us in the service professions, right, that dedicate our life to walking this path of service, we don't really do it to make a lot of money or be famous. Often there is a light inside that inspires us to walk this path. But sometimes that light can dim, particularly, this time of year and all that we are holding. So while there are very concrete objectives around our learning for our time today, my most heartfelt intention is that you leave today with your light being rekindled just a little. So a little bit about our learning journey. So for the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to go on a journey together. And these are some of the things that we hope to explore. The first is that you have an opportunity to reconnect and recommit to your why. Why do you do what you do? And why are you here today? So we're going to have an opportunity to explore that. And this is going to be more of an interactive professional learning. And so what we know from adult learning theory and best practices around adult learning is we learn through making meaning by talking with each other. So there'll be several opportunities throughout to reflect, pause, connect, and even start to build some community in this space. And dare I say, even model what it means to cultivate understanding and belonging right here, right now. We're also going to identify strategies to cultivate empathy and compassion, and I'm going to lay a bit of a foundation, and then my amazing colleague Julie Norton in the afternoon is going to offer more instruction around compassion from a clinical perspective. So I'm really looking forward to Julie's offering. And then we're going to engage with practices that promote a culture of belonging. So I'll be sharing some evidence-based practices to help cultivate belonging in our various contexts. And then we'll also be exploring some practices for cultivating brave, safe, and supportive spaces. And then finally, receiving some strategies that promote resilience. So I invite you to pause for a moment and just touch in which one of these outcomes is speaking to you in this moment. Which one feels the juiciest for you? And just noting that as we move through our learning journey. So I also want to lift up the agricultural metaphor, which really comes from the work of Parker Palmer, who some of you may be familiar with. And I just shared these outcomes, and now I'm going to say that I also invite you to think about these outcomes as possibilities. And just like the farmer prepares the ground and tends to the seeds, there are no guarantees that they will grow, right? And what happens is highly dependent on other factors. So we may have the intention of these outcomes, and then there's the reality that what unfolds today isn't necessarily going to be linear. We're planting seeds, and we also don't know if, when, and how they will bloom. So invite you to kind of sit with that agricultural metaphor as well. I know oftentimes we go to professional learnings and we're like, there to receive and get, and I'm going to actually invite us to see if we can approach that a little differently today. I also invite you to train your brain for growth, and just an invitation into gentle curiosity. There is a wealth of expertise in this room, and I want to acknowledge that, lift that up. We're going to have an opportunity to share our expertise with each other in our small group conversations today. But if I say something that you already know, an invitation to pause. What can I learn from this? Maybe I'm using some different language or a different spin on things. And then if something isn't working for you, to have agency. If you need to get up, if you need to use the bathroom, to take care of yourself, to really have agency. You know what you need. Take care of your needs. And here are some guidelines to support us being together today that come from the cultural anthropologist Angeles Arian. And the first is to just show up and choose to be present. Maybe it's lucky that the internet is down, so kind of forcing us to be even a little more present today. But what you put in today is what you get out of it. And our attention is always being pulled in so many directions. So to just give yourself the gift of showing up fully with your presence. And then pay attention to what has heart and meaning for you. There's no doubt I'm going to share stuff that will not land with you, and I might share stuff that really resonates. That's okay. Pay attention to what moves your spirit. And then tell the truth without blame or judgment. So often, blame is a way to discharge our discomfort. And so I'm going to invite you to kind of look at when blame or judgment arises, and how can you still tell your truth, but do that in a way that isn't also with blame or judgment. And then be open but not attached to outcome. That's the agricultural metaphor there. Be open but not attached to outcome. So let's drop in and let's start with, why do you do what you do? What's your why? And if it's helpful, you can tune inwards. If it feels safe, you can close your eyes. But just touching in, why do you do what you do? What brought you here? Why do you do what you do? And just trusting that whatever's coming to you is what you're meant to hear internally in this moment, and we'll have an opportunity to revisit that a little later on this morning. So I'm going to share my why, And this is a photo of my dad. My dad is the man in the suit, and this is him at the airport in Bombay in 1970. He was the first and only person to leave his ancestral homeland and come to America. And his entire family came to the airport. And the woman you see next to him with the glasses is my paternal grandmother. And I actually never had a chance to meet her. But when I think about the life she lived growing up in pre-independent India under colonial rule and being married off when she was 13, I can't help but touch into the profound freedom and opportunity I have as a woman being raised in this country in this particular day and time. And when I think about my ancestors, and particularly all the women in my ancestral lineage, it motivates me to really do whatever I can to not only work tirelessly towards our external freedom, but the internal freedom, that internal liberation. And I'm an educator because for me, education's the heart of social change. And transforming education is really how we're going to transform the world. And this visual came to me in March of 2020. What else was happening in March of 2020? The pandemic, right? And it came to me in a dream. And for me, it really illustrates my life calling, which is the intersection of mindfulness, social and emotional learning, and belonging, but really in service of our individual and collective liberation. And for me, the work of social and emotional learning and mindfulness, and we'll talk a little more about this today, must really focus on creating the future, not just fixing the present. And often, mindfulness and emotional intelligence are brought into spaces to fix the present, right? To fix the problem. But we need to remember that it can also be a powerful force in building a different future. And I love this quote from J. Krishnamurti, who's also from my the same ancestral community that I'm from, where he says that true liberation is freedom from one's own automatic responses. So that's that inner freedom that I alluded to earlier. And we'll get a chance to explore that a little more today, but wanted to offer this definition of liberation to guide our learning journey. So I love poetry. I feel like poetry can be a window into our soul and create meaning that is not possible through other mediums. And so as we connect back to the why that came up for you in our reflection a little while ago, we're going to use poetry to maybe deepen that reflection. So I'm going to read this poem aloud and let the words drop into your body and being, and then I'm going to offer some reflective prompts. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain the thread. But it's hard for others to see while you hold it. You can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. The Way It Is by William Stafford. So let's linger here for a moment and see if there are any words or phrases that resonate with you from this poem. And I'm curious, what is the path that led you here today to this symposium focused on understanding and belonging? What is the thread that you follow? What is your thread? So let's just take a moment of internal think time. Really touch in, like, what's the path that led you here? What's your thread? And in a moment, I'm going to invite you to turn to a partner. If there's an odd number of people at your table, like there's 3 people, just be mindful of equity of voice. I'm going to give us a few minutes to connect, introduce yourselves, and just share.
What's that thread? What's that thread? All right. And when you see my hand come up, this is the raised attention signal, so all the educators in the room totally know what I'm doing when I have my hands up. You know, it's time to close your conversations, your small group conversations, and we'll come back as a whole group. But let's take a moment and connect with the person next to us and just share what's our thread and what led us here today. Okay, all right. Hey, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. George was just giving me some tips on like the making sure it makes for good TV. And then there was some mic stuff, but I think we're fine. Yeah, it's just my hand now. All right. All right. So we're going to take some time now to thank our new friend, thank our new colleagues, and come back as a whole group. So a little later on today, I'm going to talk about something called the 3 signature SEL practices, and one of them is a welcoming inclusion activity. And one of the reasons why we wanted to get you all connecting and talking at the start is that research shows that when you get folks talking at the start of a gathering, particularly in the classroom context, but also in adult professional learning context, folks are more likely to stay engaged throughout when they have an opportunity to talk and make meaning at the start. So I want you to hold on to your thread throughout today. So today's offering is around understanding, cultivating understanding and belonging to positively impact youth mental health. And when we think about belonging, we see here that belonging is a core human need. And when that is not met, like these other needs, right, it leads to suffering or resistance or a variety of behaviors we might be experiencing and witnessing in our classrooms, with our clients, and in our communities. So just taking a moment to take in some of these core human needs we all have. And we're going to touch on some of these today. So the need for purpose, meaning, transcendence, the need for trust, the need for genuine self-esteem, and the need for mastery or competence, the need for autonomy, and the need for belonging. And in motivation theory, we often talk about the ABCs: autonomy, belonging, and competence, the 3 things we all really need to thrive in a professional setting, but I think also in classroom environments as well. So what is belonging? And this is my son. He's now 5, but I just love this picture. And I miss him, so I'm bringing him into the space. But when I think about my son and what I want for him more than anything is I want for him to feel a sense of belonging. I want for him to be fully seen and heard. And in my work, and a lot of my work around belonging is really inspired by the work of John A. Powell, who leads the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. And I searched and searched for a definition of belonging for so long. And then I actually stumbled upon this, who's from a woman who's from the same ancestral community as well, interesting. And I found that it was a really comprehensive definition of belonging. I think so often we think of belonging as just this felt sense of being seen, but it's actually so much more. And so I'm going to read this definition out loud, and I'm going to invite you, similar to the poem, to just experience the words landing in your body and being, but also see what resonates, see what might be new, see what you might be wondering about. So what is belonging? Belonging is a state of enacting and being wholeness. It requires an expansive quality, the ability to zoom out and expand our circle of concern and care. Within the process of creating belonging is the need to eliminate or reduce the negative effects of harmful and oppressive structures. Equity-based strategies and decolonizing efforts are intrinsic to the work of belonging. And prioritizing the right to belong is vital in order to have a thriving and politically engaged populace. So just taking this in and noting what words may resonate or speak to you in this moment. And the main thing I want to lift up is that we really can't talk about belonging if we don't discuss power. And so we're going to start off today doing a little exploration around our own power and privilege. And so some of you may have seen this before. There's many different wheels like this. This is one that I particularly resonate with. And so just take a moment now and see where you are at the margins or towards the center in these areas. And so just taking this in, doing your own internal reflection. And just also naming that we will share the slides later. So I know some people are like, I want to take a photo of this, but we'll be sharing all the materials from today. So just taking a moment to touch in where you are. And in your doing so, just reflecting, where are you in your own circles? Have your experiences with power and privilege impacted you? And again, we're just doing our own kind of internal reflection here. And what I'm going to walk us through now is some more activities around how we cultivate connections with youth. And so when we think about building those positive relationships with young people, there are usually 3 core elements at play: identity, mindset, and skill. And in the education world, we think of those 3 elements as foundational to creating a learning partnership with a young person. And today we're going to actually touch into identity and mindset. We're not going over skill because skill is very specific to the role and context that you're in with a young person. But we must identify what we need to know, learn, and address in each of these areas: identity, mindset, and skill, for both the young person and ourselves, in order to actually create a powerful relationship. So let's start with identity. And when we think about identity, we want to reflect on the youth identity. So I'm going to invite you to bring to mind a young person that you work with. And we're going to bring that young person to mind as we move through this exercise. Everyone have their young person? And if you don't work directly with youth, maybe you have a family member that's a young person. And so when we think about youth identity, just touching in, like, how does this young person see who they are in the world? How do they see who they are in the world? Their culture, race, gender, class, sexual identity, language, ability, and those categories are definitely not exhaustive, but just really bringing that young person to mind. Their situatedness, and their identity with their peers and within school. And then touch into your identity. How do you see who you are in the world? And thinking about these different facets of your identity. And with that same young person, just dropping in a little deeper, How might this young person experience me given my identity? How can I build rapport and cultural synchronization with this young person just in service of our work together? And so I'm going to lift up some of you in this space I know are very familiar with the world of social and emotional learning and these core competencies. But when we think about our adult social awareness, what do I understand about this young person's identity in the world? And when you think about your self-awareness, what do I understand about my own identity and situatedness and how others may experience me because of this? So just taking that in. And just seeing what's coming up for you as you think about this young person. And I'm going to offer an example that you can do after today, maybe back with your colleagues, back in your context. And there's many different, identity mapping exercises. This is me. And the blue font are areas of my identity where I'm part of the dominant culture. And the green is where I'm in the non-dominant culture. And so it's just another way of exploring. And of course, I have many more identities in this, but the different aspects of myself and how the young people I work with, how they might be experiencing me based on these different aspects. And so often I think we identify, the different aspects of our identity, but we don't always think through, well, what parts of my identity are part of the dominant culture and what parts of my identity are part of the non-dominant culture? And so in doing that, and maybe even just doing it internally now and then having the opportunity to do this with your colleagues in a deeper way back in your context, what are some of the identities you think most or least about? What are some of your identities you want to learn more about? And what are some identities that have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself and how others may perceive you? So just taking that in. Now, when we think about promising practices for creating a culture of belonging, there are 3 that I'm going to lift up. And one is cultural integration. The next is promoting ethnic racial identity development. And the third is community building. And so what is cultural integration? It's really creating a space for young people to connect with their cultural assets, concepts, and skills that really affirm aspects of their identity. Spaces where there's deeper reflection about our own lives and society, and also opportunities to support cultural competence by facilitating learning of their own cultures and other cultures, but really making sure that in our work we're finding meaningful, authentic ways to integrate that. And then promoting ethnic racial identity development. And I want to just name here that, ethnic racial identity development is not just for people of color, it's for white-bodied folks too. And if this is something that's new to you or you're curious about, feel free to email me because we've developed some really powerful protocols to support racial affinity groups in doing some of this ethnic racial identity development work. And so in short, this is, again, like much longer conversation, but really recognizing and assessing some of the impacts of our biases and our beliefs, really touching into some of our strengths, grounding and affirming our cultural heritage. And these affinity spaces are in service of wider community building. But these spaces are important and necessary. And I think sometimes for white-bodied folks, it's always like, well, why do we have to have spaces for people of color? Why do we have to have spaces for racial affinity groups? And I just name that, at least from my own personal experience, speaking from I here, that when you're not part of the dominant culture, every day is can be like swimming upstream. And you need to have cultural refuges and spaces that feel safe, where you can process and connect and talk with others who share that similar experience. But it can be crafted in a way that is ultimately in service of building the beloved community that Dr. King has really, really brought into our consciousness. And then we have community building. And so I want to lift up a couple of things here when we're talking about community building. One is the implementation of something called the 3 signature SEL practices, which I'll share in a moment. The other is just really developing goals and expectations and collaboration. You know, if we were here and not just a one-off thing, if we were going to be here multiple times, we would do a whole process of co-constructing agreements together. How do we want to be with each other? And so doing that, really co-creating those goals and expectations is vital. And then also engaging in collaborative problem solving. So it's not always resting on the facilitator or the teacher, but how can we really be engaging in that collaborative problem solving together? So what are these 3 signature SEL practices? And I'll say that they started in Oakland. So a little bit about me and my history. So Karen mentioned in the introduction that I lead an organization called Transformative Educational Leadership. Before that, I worked in partnership with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, also known as CASEL, which is one of the world's leading organizations when it comes to the advancement of research, policy, and practice around social and emotional learning. And I worked in partnership with them in Oakland Unified School District, where I was a public school administrator, a central office administrator for more than 5 years to implement social and emotional learning systemically in more than 86 schools. And we developed these 3 signature SEL practices as a way to really integrate social and emotional learning and create the culture of belonging, communities of belonging in our schools. And what they consist of are a welcoming inclusion activity. And we had an experience of that with the poem, The Way It Is, and connecting with each other. And it's an activity that happens at the beginning. It's intentional, and it really sets the tone and invites participation. And then there's engaging practices. So these are a variety of ways we make meaning and connect with each other, and it's how we learn. You know, it's how we learn best. And then an optimistic close. And an optimistic close is really thoughtfully finishing our activity in a way that honors the work and looks ahead. And all of these practices have 2 specific components. They involve individual think time and purposeful social interaction. And the key word there is purposeful. So I'm going to show a video of an example of one of these practices. It's in a classroom context, but I do believe you could take these practices into any context, even in a one-on-one context, to help build connection in those communities of belonging. So here we go.
It's appreciation, apology, or aha.
The closing circle activity is called the 3 A's: appreciation, apologies, and ahas. So the whole purpose is just to have some space to reflect on our day.
All I want you to do is to stand around the room somewhere in a circle while we do our brief shout out.
People can either identify an appreciation they have, an apology they have, or an aha, a moment where there's like a light bulb moment in their head.
My aha was that race is not the only part of our identity. So can we get a few people to shout out an appreciation, apology, or aha?
I want to appreciate Jonathan. He helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go with my personal statement.
I think those types of appreciations or community recognitions can go a long way to build the bonds. That's the whole point, right? Building community.
I apologize for having my headphones in half of the time to everyone.
Thanks a lot for that, Carlos. That means a lot.
It's like a real video in a real classroom. So we have a playbook that we'll send as a follow-up that has several, maybe definitely more than 50 examples of these 3 SEL signature practices. So we'll make sure you get that resource as a follow-up, and you can utilize that and adapt that for your context. So We talked a little bit about identity and some of those promising practices for building spaces of belonging, and I want to invite us into an exploration around mindset. And so, again, thinking about that same young person, right? So this is the applied learning. We're thinking about this young person. And what are their beliefs about their own learning and capacity? What about their sense of belonging? What is the belief they have about their effort and ability? And what about a belief around success being possible? Or a belief that the work that they are doing in school has value even? So I'm just thinking about this young person's beliefs. And now your own mindset. What are your beliefs about helping this young person succeed? What are some of your assumptions about their ability to succeed? Any biases that might be coming up as well? And this is for you. We're not sharing, so I want you to get really honest here around those beliefs. And as you do that, I want to lift up the work of some of my colleagues at Californians for Justice, which is an amazing youth-led organization I had an opportunity to collaborate with quite a bit when I was working in the Oakland Public Schools. And they had a campaign around relationship-centered schools. And we often talk about the opportunity gap, but what they surfaced was a belief gap. And this belief gap was this real gap in educators' beliefs in the capacity of these young people. And so we'll move into an even deeper reflection. What are some ways you need to check or develop your own mindset about what's possible? And how might you support the development of mindsets for this young person to persist through learning? And again, bringing up the adult social and emotional learning here. What do I understand about this young person's mindset relative to the subject, school, to learning, whatever your direct touch is, whatever your context, around your connection with this young person? And what is your own mindset around your ability to support this student successfully? And just taking that in. And in a moment, I'm going to share a video that one of my dear friends, Ann Childers, who was a Santa Cruz educator for many, many years. She now has moved. You got folks know Ann Childers here? Something, yeah? So we're going to show a video from Ann. I had to lift up something from someone from Santa Cruz in this keynote. Ann now lives in North County, San Diego, near me, and we've become new, fast friends. And her son has special needs. And so this video we're about to see, I think, really connects to this exploration of mindset. So here we go. know I'm not the only one that has tears, so, and I think I've seen this like 50 times. So just taking that in for a moment. Our mindset, our beliefs, they drive our action, our language. And they have a profound effect on young people and their families. And today we can make a shift. So when we think about belonging, and there's been this movement towards from inclusion, from talking about inclusion to belonging. I love this visual from the Othering and Belonging Institute that clearly illustrates what exclusion is, what inclusion is, which is like, all right, come into our structure that still may not be set up for you, but we're going to include you in, versus belonging, which is about co-creating, collaborating, and so much more complex and so much harder to do, but has to be the way we go. And so we're going to move into another clip in a moment that also comes from the Othering and Belonging Institute. And you'll hear the voice of John A. Powell. And in it, he gives some context around the videos from a couple years ago, but it's probably even more relevant in this moment. But when we think about the power we have in every moment to advance a world built on belonging. So let's check this out.
Of all the forces shaping politics and power around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are and who we are becoming. We are in a period of accelerated change in at least 4 areas: globalization, technology, the environment, and demographic change. We can only process so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety, which is a normal biological reaction. But how we respond to this anxiety is social. Our response is greatly shaped by the stories presented by leadership and through culture. These stories speak to our deepest values and our core beliefs about who we are, many of which operate at the subconscious level. We can respond to these changes either as a threat or as an opportunity. The first response is breaking. The second is bridging. Breaking can create a deep fear of other groups, making it easier to accept false stories of us versus them. Breaking perpetuates isolation, hardens racism, and builds oppressive systems, while driving our politics and institutions toward anti-democratic and inhumane practices. The other response is bridging, which calls on us to imagine a larger, more inclusive we. When we bridge, we see demographic change and our diverse identities as positive and enhancing who we are. Bridging calls on us to engage in healthy dialogue and requires us to listen deeply. Bridging does not mean abandoning your identity. Bridging means acknowledging our shared humanity, rejecting that there is a them, and moving toward a future where there is instead a new us. For when we bridge, we not only open up to others, we also open up to changes within ourselves, where we can participate in creating a society built on belonging.
All right. So I often like to think that in every moment we have 2 choices. We can either bridge or break. And so today is really an invitation to all of us for how we can be bridge builders in each moment in our context. So right now, I want you to think about someone in your life. Could be a young person, could be someone else, but is there a small bridge that you can explore making? A small bridge you can explore making. And I really believe that mindfulness, which we're about to make a transition into, and social and emotional learning, or the skills of emotional intelligence, are the how of bridge building. They're actually what we need to cultivate in order to be able to build bridges and actually advance a world built on belonging. So a little bit about social and emotional learning, because there's a lot of experts here, and you'll hear a little later about some upcoming opportunities with the Santa Cruz County Office of Education with their social emotional learning, or SEL community of practice. And I want to just share my lineage around social and emotional learning. And it really is rooted in the work of this book, Waging Peace in Our Schools. And one of the origins of SEL we don't often hear about is that it came out of really transforming our culture of violence. And it was grounded in the principles of nonviolence. And nonviolence isn't the absence of violence, it's actually promoting peace. It is actually a very engaged practice. And the principles of nonviolence are the foundation for building the beloved community that Dr. King envisioned. And it's also about shifting our consciousness. And very often in the social emotional learning world, we see these 5 core competencies of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. But I wanted to offer another way of thinking about social and emotional learning today. This is from the social emotional ethical learning framework that comes out of the Center for Compassion and Ethics at Emory University. And what we see here are domains and dimensions. And in the domains, we see a systems domain, a social domain, a personal domain. And in the dimensions, we see awareness, compassion, and engagement. And I think one of the areas of growth in the more conventional social and emotional learning movement is this sort of systems level of thinking about social and emotional learning. And I also want to lift up, that social emotional learning and mindfulness, they are certainly not a panacea. And my good friend Dina Simmons often talks about, we can't breathe our way out of oppression, right? And we can't. At the same time, we can't tackle equity issues without breathing, right? It's a both and. And so just a reminder that we are constantly holding and sitting with paradox when we are really engaged in this work around advancing a world built on belonging. So the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou said that in each moment there are 4 questions we are unconsciously asking each other. Do you see me? Do you care that I am here? Am I good enough for you? Am I enough for you, or do you need for me to be better in some way? And can I tell that I'm special to you by the way that you look at me? And the truth is, we cannot answer these questions if we are not present with our full presence. And whenever we enter a room, our nervous system is always scanning to answer these 3 questions. Am I safe? Do they like me? Am I good enough to belong here? So cultivating understanding and belonging requires that we are present with our full presence. So we can do, all of the identity mapping, we can examine our identity, but if we are not present with our full presence, and if we're not really in tune with what's folding in our internal life in relation to what's happening externally, that work is really not going to have the power that it could have. And when I say present, doesn't mean that we're perfect. And to just acknowledge that we're all on this journey, there's no woke. We're on the path of awakening together, and it's continual. And so this is hard because we are actually wired to not be present. And we are not present almost 50% of the time. And so often people talk about mindfulness as like, oh, it's being present. And I actually like to think about it as it's actually recognizing when you have wandered and gently bringing yourself back, because it is the nature of the mind to wander. So often we're on autopilot, and these are some characteristics of being on autopilot, so you can just take that in, you know. And when we're on autopilot, are we really living? Are we really living? And so the intention here, like if we're going to even think about belonging, we have to first start with shifting from being on autopilot to being more aware. And so at its core, mindfulness is about being aware, but I'm going to give us a little more of a complex definition, and we'll explore a little model to deepen our understanding, perhaps. I did also want to make a distinction between meditation and mindfulness, because these terms are often used interchangeably. And for me, meditation is like the formal practice. It's like you're taking time out to engage in a formal practice, whatever that might be for you. And that formal practice, you are working on integrating your mind and body so they are established in the present moment. And we're not as disembodied, right, throughout our day. But mindfulness, and why I think it's so magical and powerful, is that it can be practiced anywhere, anytime, and with anyone, just by showing up and being fully engaged in the here and now. And so just in terms of meditations, there's a ton of resources on my website, and we'll send follow-up resources. But if you want some guided meditations, there are several of them there, and we'll also send some as a follow-up. And I also wanted to just share some tips when you're offering a guided practice. Just, always using universal and invitational language. Providing choices for anchors of attention. We know that the breath, a lot of times people equate mindfulness with the breath and breathing, but we know the breath isn't neutral for everyone. So offering different choices for attention and honoring the origin of the practice, only sharing what you've embodied, and offering practices that are free from promoting or hindering any religious beliefs, and practicing kindness towards yourself. So let's explore a little bit around, I love this graphic that came out a couple years ago of mindfulness, it's this word that's used all the time, but what is it really? And before I give you a definition, I want to share kind of what mindfulness means to me in my life. So for me, mindfulness has to do with expanding my nervous system so I can hold greater complexity and uncertainty. And in a world that is only becoming more complex and uncertain, I think that is vital. And I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, because for me it also really describes what mindfulness is. And so he says, if your cup is small, a little bit of salt will make the water salty. If your heart is small, then a little bit of pain can make you suffer. Your heart must be large. So this is how I define it. I define mindfulness as paying attention to our inner and outer life, so what's happening internally and externally, while being grounded in our body, in our breathing, and our senses, so we can cultivate a curious, open-hearted presence and awareness of being. And so I'm going to break each of those down for you rather quickly, because we're going to move through a mindful parenting model as another window into exploring mindfulness. So paying attention to our inner and outer life as it unfolds, we are holding a dual awareness of what's happening internally and externally simultaneously, cultivating this dual awareness. We are being grounded in our body, our breathing, and our senses. So I mentioned earlier, the breath isn't always neutral for everyone. I find that our senses are a powerful gateway into the present moment. And then settling our mind, right? Settling our mind so we can be more responsive than reactive. And cultivating curiosity and open-heartedness. And for me, thank you. Curiosity is the antidote to judgment. A lot of my suffering comes from judging myself, judging others, but that curiosity can literally melt judgment. And then awareness of something called interbeing. So interbeing, raise your hand if interbeing is a new word for you. So a couple folks. For a lot of folks, it's familiar. It's getting out there into the lexicon. So when mindfulness has sort of been translated into more of a Western context, some of these, some important elements from the cultural container that housed mindfulness in some Eastern traditions were lost. And I think the interbeing was one of them. And so interbeing is a term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, who's my teacher, who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There really isn't a definition for interbeing. It's something that you come through insight, through your intentional practice of mindfulness. But for our purposes, I'm going to define it as interdependently coexisting and honoring the interdependence of every person to all other persons and aspects of our planet. So nothing exists independently. We are all products of infinite causes and conditions. And in a beautiful illustration of interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote that if you were a poet, you would see that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without the cloud, there'd be no rain. Without the rain, the trees cannot grow. And without the trees, you cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not there, the sheet of paper cannot be there either. And he even went on to say that if you look deeply into this paper, you'd also see the logger who cut down the trees and the logger's ancestors as well. And so in that powerful example, and in this sort of discussion of mindfulness is really an invitation to shift towards this interbeing consciousness, this shift from this transactional way of being to really recognizing all that is at play in each moment and in everything. And this is the Chinese character for mindfulness, and the top portion is now, and the bottom is heart-mind. And I want to lift it up because in a lot of Asian languages, the word for mind is also the word for heart. And so in how, again, like things got translated into a Western context, we think mindfulness is about here, but it's actually about here, but it's really about integration, right? It's integrating the mind and the body. So how many of you are parents? We got parents in the room? All right. How many people know someone who's a parent? All right, so this is going to be relevant for everyone. I'm going to move us through this mindful parenting model. I also want to check my time, see where we are. We're doing all right. Okay. So there are 5 dimensions to this mindful parenting model. And again, we're using this model as just a window into dissecting mindfulness a little bit. And we're going to go through each one of these. So we're going to start with listening with full attention. Listening with full attention. And we're going to get a chance to practice that a little later this morning. I love this character, again, a Chinese character, for listening. So let's just take it in. We need our ears to hear, our mind to think, our heart to feel. We need our undivided attention to focus, and we need our eyes to see. So just taking this in as a reminder that listening is a full body being experience. And when we are listened to in that way, the difference is palpable. And Nancy Klein wrote a book called A Time to Think, and one of the big takeaways from this book is that the quality of attention that you offer another affects the quality of the person's thinking. So non-judgmental acceptance of self and child. And this is a hard one. I talked a little bit about judgment before, but in many ways, and this is really hard to do, particularly as a parent, speaking as a parent, but it's an invitation into radical acceptance. And I want to mention that it's not about accepting life on life's terms. It's not about resisting, what we can or cannot change, but it's not trying to fight the present moment. And when we fight the present moment, I think it stops us from accessing the potential for greater wisdom and compassion. And so again, curiosity is the antidote to judgment. It is vital if we really want to build a bridge. and advance a world built on belonging, we have to flex those curiosity muscles. And emotional awareness of self and child. So interesting fun fact, apparently only 1 out of every 3 adults can accurately identify what they're feeling when they're feeling it. So we're not a very emotionally literate population. And this is one of many, many tools out there to support our emotional literacy. How many of you are familiar with the mood meter? Lots of folks. Great tool. Also want to say that we often feel many things at once. So sometimes, I have a young child, and he's like, well, I feel this, I feel that, I feel, and that's okay. And so we'll practice right now, and you see on the, for folks that this is new for, on the x-axis, we see it going from unpleasant to pleasant. On the y-axis, low energy to high energy. And so just take a moment and plot where you are in this moment. Where are you? Where are you on the mood meter right now? We are practicing our self-awareness. We are building some emotional literacy here. And just identifying where you are. And you might identify more than one feeling, and that's all good. All right. And self-regulation in the parenting relationship. And for me, self-regulation has a lot to do with the saying that I'm sure many of you heard, be the thermostat, not the thermometer, Be the thermostat, set the temperature. Don't react to, what the temperature is in the room. And the way we do that is through deliberate, intentional, consistent practice of mindfulness-based strategies, of emotional intelligence skills. And this is a little definition of self-regulation, but I want to lift up co-regulation. And also say, people are talking a lot about co-regulation these days. My husband and I have been together for 12 years, married for 10, and we are on this journey of really trying to understand co-regulation, and it takes deliberate, consistent practice, just as you are trying to build up those self-regulation, skills. Co-regulation takes a lot of practice too. And here are some elements of how to co-regulate. You want to provide a warm, responsive relationship, and we know that, emotions are contagious, emotional contagion, Emotion contagion. And so our state is transmitted to those around us. And so we need to kind of work on our internal state to be able to provide that warm, responsive relationship, and to help actually explicitly teach some of those self-regulation skills, and also providing certain structures in the environment. So, my background's as an educator, and I know about, a lot of classrooms that have calm corners or peace corners or spaces where it's part of the structure of the environment to promote ways in which young people can learn to self-regulate, and when a teacher has consistent practice, to even be able to co-regulate with a young person. And then also this is like, James Baldwin has so many gems of wisdom, but this is the one that is so relevant for me now in my life as a parent of an almost 6-year-old, that children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. And I'm just seeing, things that I don't want to pass on, he's doing, and I'm like, ooh, got to check myself. So just remembering that we teach through who we are, we transmit who we are to the young people we work with. And then compassion for the self and child. And often people use empathy and compassion interchangeably. And I think Julie's going to do a really deep dive into compassion after lunch today. But I want to clarify, just as we clarified what belonging is, and what mindfulness is. I want to really clarify what empathy is, and then compassion. So empathy is the ability to experience and understand what others are feeling, while maintaining a clear discernment about your feelings and perspectives. And there are kind of 3 components when I think about cultivating empathy. We want to settle our mind, we want to see similarities, and we want to offer kindness. And I'm going to invite you to do a short practice with me now. So if you could get 5% more comfortable. And everything I offer today is by invitation, not demand. So if you feel like, hey, I'm not feeling it, it's all good, but it's an invitation. And this practice will take just a little over a minute. So just see if you can get even a little more comfortable. And if it feels safe, you can close your eyes, but you don't have to. And I'm going to invite you to bring to mind someone in your life who you have mild resistance to. So don't pick someone who you have like, you think about them and you're like feeling it everywhere. Choose someone that you have some mild resistance with. Could be a colleague, could even be a young person you're working with, could be a family member. Mild resistance. And just bring them to your mind's eye. And I'm going to offer some phrases, and let's allow those phrases to drop into your body and being, and if it's accessible, you can silently say these phrases as well. Just like me, this person has during their life experienced physical and emotional pain and suffering. Just like me. Just like me, this person has been sad at some point in their life. Just like me, this person worries. Just like me, this person will die one day. And just like me, this person is learning about life. Just like me, this person wants to be content with what life has given. And just like me, this person wishes to be free from pain and suffering. Just like me, this person wishes to be happy. And just like me, this person wishes to be safe, strong, and healthy. And so now, just taking some moments for well wishes to arise, if they do so naturally. And if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them. And just check in with how you're feeling right now. And we had a little video, but we're gonna skip it. I'll just say what it is, because I know some of you may have seen it before. It's the empathy, the power of human connection from the Cleveland Clinic. Anyone know what video I'm talking about? So we'll send it in the follow-up. It's a beautiful, beautiful video. But if you want to take any of this back to your context, that would be a great video to share, and we'll make sure you get it. So there are 3 types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, which is really that also known as perspective taking. There's emotional empathy, where you're really feeling what the other person is feeling. So just the other day, someone was walking by, I was in a coffee shop, and they stubbed their toe, and I could literally feel the pain in my toe, so that's an example of kind of that emotional empathy. And then there's compassionate empathy, where we're really merging the head and the heart, right? The cognitive and the affective. And so just for me, empathy is really important, but my North Star is compassion. And my North Star is compassion, and it's the name of my company. The Sanskrit name, for my company is Karuna, which means compassion in Sanskrit. It's compassion because it's not just about empathy, but cultivating our ability to hold suffering with tenderness and engage in thoughtful action to alleviate the suffering we see. So there's a couple dimensions of compassion that I want to lift up. We can accept compassion or recall when someone was compassionate to us. We can offer ourselves compassion. We can offer another compassion, and we can observe another showing compassion. And here's kind of the difference between empathy and compassion, right? So empathy, recognizing and sharing the emotions of another. Compassion kind of is more of that interbeing, recognizing the you in me. And empathy, feeling with another person, compassion, being moved by another's distress and wanting to help. And empathy is really this desire to feel. Compassion is the desire to help. So if someone were to say to me, what is like your one sentence definition of compassion? It's like, it's orienting toward what would be of service. What would be of service? But we get to that conclusion through, really cultivating our own inner wisdom, perspective, in order to kind of make a wise decision. And I want to introduce you to this acronym. It's actually a longer practice that we don't have the time. If I was with you for a day, we would do all these practices. But I do want to just put this on your radar because it's a powerful acronym and also another practice that can really orient us towards compassion. And it's the grace practice that's based on the work of Roshi Joan Halifax, who some of you may know has done a lot of powerful work with death and dying. And the G stands for gathering our attention. So we're going to start with kind of gathering our attention. We might be thinking about the person who is in distress, the person whose suffering we wish to alleviate. And then the R is we want to recall our intention. Why are we even engaging in this practice? What are we in service about? What is our intention? And then the A is attuning. We're regulating ourselves. We're also attuning to the other person. You may even touch into a short kind of just like me practice, attuning to that person. And then the C is considering what would serve. And in my tradition, that sounds a lot like looking deeply at the person, at the situation, really considering what would serve. And then the E is ethical engagement, really identifying what is the right pathway forward. Now, empathy and compassion are so important when we're thinking about cultivating understanding and belonging, the theme of our gathering today. But we also need to make sure that we're including ourselves in our circle of care. And I want to just bring into our conversation the importance of resilience. When I started today, I shared that this gathering is a powerful expression of inner and collective resilience. And I love this quote, this definition from Anne Maston about what resilience is. And she says, it is, it's an ordinary superpower. It doesn't come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of being human. And I think traditionally we think of resilience as like bouncing back, but I feel like there's a lot more texture to it. In my tradition, in my spiritual tradition, we talk about the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows that come with this precious human birth. And for me, resilience is cultivating the capacity to hold the joy and the sorrow, to hold the pain and the possibility in each moment. And we do that by expanding our resiliency zone. So some of you might be familiar with the community-based resiliency model. Is anyone out there, Trauma Resource Institute work? We don't have time to go over that today, but great, we'll send you, in the follow-up, but there's some really great work out there on how we can really expand our zone of resiliency, which is really kind of cultivating, right, that inner spaciousness so we can hold more complexity, hold more uncertainty, and be able to meet the moment and meet that with wisdom and compassion. So a little bit about resilience. There are various ways in which resilience manifests. It manifests physiologically, psychologically, interpersonally, even institutionally, which is where I'm really excited. And then cultural resilience as well. I think about my ancestors. I think about my paternal grandmother, whose picture you saw, who lived a very hard life. And I think about that resilience that now lives in me. And I tap into that when I need it. And just a little bit more about resilience. They are these positive, behaviors, and habits of mind. They're skills and attitudes that can be transmitted and explicitly taught. But I think what's most important is when we strengthen individual resilience, it automatically helps to impact that collective resilience that we really need so much right now with all the world is facing. So some resilience traits that you see here really map on a lot to what we've been talking about around mindfulness and compassion and empathy. But some specific ways in which resilience can manifest. And we're going to talk a little more about spirituality in a little bit. So I think a very important resilience practice, an inner resilience practice for me, is self-compassion. I think particularly for those of us in the service profession. And Kristen Neff has really brought so many gifts into the world around her research around self-compassion. When we think about self-compassion, there are 3 components according to this model. There's the mindfulness, being aware of the physical, emotional pain we might be experiencing in the moment. And then treating ourselves with kindness and recognizing that we're not alone. That so many, just like the Just Like Me practice we touched into earlier, just like that, the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows that come with this precious human birth, that suffering and pain are part of the experience of being human. So it connects us with our common humanity. There are some specific self-compassion practices. There's one called affectionate breathing that if you go to my website now, you'll get a guided meditation for it. On the resources section, we'll also send you the recording as well as a follow-up. It's like a short 6-minute practice, guided practice on really breathing in a way that is infused with affection and tenderness and self-compassion. And another way we can cultivate resilience, and I'm just checking my time here. Another way is to just touch, savor, and soak in your joy. So homework for the weekend, when you feel joy, breathe it in and savor it for 30 seconds or more. This is really important. Because we are evolutionarily wired to privilege the negative over the positive. And so we have to really intentionally and deliberately practice soaking in those positive feeling states. So, and this is a little bit, this comes from the work of David Hawkins I was going to say, I don't mean to get too woo-woo, but we're in Santa Cruz, so. But this is a chart that really lifts up the vibrational frequency states of certain emotions. And you see joy is up there right at the top. So there are some additional practices, and I want to make sure we close with this part on spirituality, because I think it's really relevant to today. But we'll just let you know, we'll send a follow-up resource that has some of these resilience practices that I won't be able to go through now, but we'll make sure that you get them. And here we go. All right. Hold on one second. So, mindfulness, it's not a tool, it's a path. And it's been co-opted and become a tool, but really, it's a path. It's a way of life. It's a way of being in the world where you are present and aware and compassionate. And for me, it can be a powerful gateway into cultivating the spiritual dimension of our lives. And so this is a great book about spiritual intelligence that I highly recommend. And the definition of spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. And there's really powerful work happening. Have any of you heard of Dr. Lisa Miller? She started the Mind Body Institute at Teachers College, Columbia, and is doing really powerful work on the spiritual development of young people. And she talks about natural spirituality. And we're going to watch a video that I think describes it best, and then we'll have an opportunity to do a little reflection after. So here we go.
What if I told you that we have the antidote to the greatest epidemic of our time, suicide in young adults? The rate of death by suicide now rivals the rate of death by auto accident in young adults. And basic science, clear as a bell, shows us that we are 4/5 less likely to take our lives when we have a strong spiritual life that is shared. There's nothing in the clinical or social sciences as profoundly protective against suicide. Together with my colleagues at Columbia Medical School, when we looked at structural MRI, when we looked at the architecture of the brain through MRIs, what we see is in people with a sustained spiritual life, broad and pervasive regions of cortical thickness represented in red. These are regions of perception, reflection, and orientation. With 80% overlap, these regions are not thick, but thin in people with recurrent major depression. Normally in an MRI study, you see an article published with there's a little tiny speck of difference. These are huge regions of the brain to show effectively greater processing power, a thicker cortex. The cortical thickness across the regions of the spiritual brain decreased the level of symptomology of depression 1 year out, a year from now. That is very strong evidence that indeed spiritual life is neuroprotective against depression. The Army gets the same slice of American pie as does higher ed or entry-level jobs, 18 through 25-year-olds. It's one story. It's our American story, and it's the epidemic of suicide. And so the Army decided to take a data-driven approach and support the spiritual core of every soldier. And in 1 year, we are already seeing a 28% decreased rate of suicide. Can higher ed do that? Yeah. Of course higher education can do that. Can all of our institutions to receive young adults transform to support the spiritual core? Can we move from narrowly transactional relationships with young adults to ones that are loving, that are far more generative, that are transformational? People's personal spiritual life can be formed many ways. Some people say it is through prayer, meditation. Others say in nature. Nature is my cathedral. That's where I realize. And in fact, we have a great deal of science that says nature actually entrains the brain. Walking through nature does very much what prayer might do. It awakens our natural spiritual awareness. People realize their spiritual nature through many paths, one of which is religion. For about 2/3 of people, they say, I am spiritual and I am religious. And then for about 1/3 of people, they say, I am a profoundly spiritual person, but I am not religious. Both are good, and both tap the same neural correlates. There's much Strom and Dross. I am Catholic, I am Jewish, I am Muslim. Well, actually, we're all using the same spiritual neural correlates. So I often hear people say, am I a spiritual person, or how do you define spirituality? And everyone is welcome to define it and know it and feel it exactly as they want. And it is also the case that just as we are born with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose, we are born spiritual beings with a natural seat, a neuro seat of transcendent awareness. We are born, every one of us, with an innate capacity for spiritual awareness. There's one spiritual brain, and we all have it. When we realize our nature, when we build, if you will, and strengthen the spiritual core of who we really are, then our lives unfold in an entirely different way. Life is healthier. Life is far more full of resilience. Life looks different. It's far more of an adventure, an expedition. And when we boil down and look right at the data, where hundreds of peer-reviewed articles say beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's nothing as profoundly protective against the diseases of despair, the epidemic of our time, as a strong spiritual core. Over the past 25 years, as a scientist and as a clinical psychologist, it's become crystal clear to me that suffering is an invitation for a deepening of spiritual life. But we have to say yes to it. Spirituality is not a life hack. Spirituality is a deep reorientation in our lives through which we see into the truer, more foundational nature of reality. There are always two realities, and they both matter. We are a point and we are a wave. We are magnificently distinct with GPS coordinates all over the globe and exquisitely diverse zipped up bio bodysuits. And at the very same time, we are part of one human heart, one field of life, a oneness, a unit of reality, one field of consciousness, loving, sacred consciousness. And we are built to be able to toggle between these two realities. Every one of us is built to be able to perceive that we are exquisitely unique and we are part of one great sea of life. We are way oversold on the idea that we can control life. And we are really almost indoctrinated into an illusion that achieving awareness alone can be enough to handle the challenges of life. We must be able to look at life in a bigger way, in a deeper way. And that is our awakened awareness. Awakened awareness is when we shift and we say, what is life showing me now? What is being revealed here? It's a stance of deep curiosity, total observation. Observation of the eyes, yes, but also of the heart. But whatever our language, we are no longer controlling life. We are in a dynamic conversation with life. I think that in K-12, I was taught to have the wrong conversation. I was taught to go after what I want and get it, and give it every bit of strength I could so that I could win the day. And that's a helpful skill, but it's completely insufficient to live a meaningful, full life. So we need to teach children, and really maybe as adults, we need to help revisit this and teach ourselves to have a different conversation with life, to go from saying, what do I want and how am I going to get it, to the deeper, more fundamental question of what is life showing me now and what is life showing us now. So we need both achieving awareness and awakened awareness. And when the two go hand in hand, our life becomes a magnificent adventure. It becomes a quest. We're constantly part of the symphony, helping each other realize the grander opus. In this gift of life, we are loved, we are held, we are guided, and we are never alone. And not only that, we are given the ultimate opportunity to show up for one another so that we might be loving and holding and guiding and never leave anyone alone. That's the spiritual path.
All right. So, a lot of what we talked about today, I believe, is deeply connected to exploring, cultivating a spiritual core. And so here we have just these developmental tasks, right, that we go through in our lives, and just a way of looking at them like with a spiritual core and without a spiritual core. And so it's just taking that in. And this is my little guy again. And one of the ways that we incorporate this spiritual dimension into our daily life is just talking about his ancestors and making that be like a regular part of our conversation on a daily basis. And that little sign is over his bed. So just ways to integrate natural spirituality with embodied practice of daily living. And again, this is very individual, but when we think about belonging, we have to honor that this is also part of who we are in the world. And so using spiritual language, building spiritual practice, but really kind of normalizing this pathway that we all have to that ultimate sense of belonging, right? So I want you to go back to that North Star, your why, your thread, and just hold that close to your heart right now. And think about what from the last 90 minutes had heart and meaning for you. Is there one takeaway, practice, anything, any one thing? Like when someone tells you, so you went to, Coconut Grove today, what did you do there? And what is that one thing that you want to let them know? The one thing you're going to take with you from today. And just deep gratitude. There is a bunch of resources on my website, and you can check it out, and we'll send follow-up too. And we're about to go on a break, but as we do, I'm going to invite you all to hold this question close to your heart. What does understanding and belonging look like, sound like, taste like, feel like, smell like? And then we'll come back and we'll do some applied learning. So we'll be back at 10:50. And just a reminder to just kind of think through this a little bit. What does understanding and belonging look like, sound like, taste like, feel like? Yeah.